people want to take their seats, we'll... Well, thank you. Now we're here for the non-technical part of the day. Dr. Kissinger, you're the only person I know who got interested in AI in your mid-90s. Let's start there. How did you get interested in this subject?
Well, I want to apologize to this group because I am an argument against universal suffrage when it deals with computers. But I became interested at a conference where they had artificial intelligence on the program. And I thought this might be a good occasion to catch up on my sleep. And I was wandering out of the conference when Eric Schmidt said to me at the door, "This might be an interesting subject." So I listened to a presentation about the creation of a computer that would defeat in a game of Go, and it would teach itself by playing games against itself. And the speaker was confident that he could create this in a couple of years and go on from there. So to me, the idea of a self-teaching machine that would achieve intellectual dominance about an established field had significant historic applications. And so I asked the speaker afterwards, when are we going to become Indians to the machine that you're creating? When is it going to achieve a level of intellectual dominance? And I started reflecting on the issue. So I got in touch with Eric Schmidt and Dan Huttenlocker, and they started a series of conferences to which they invited me, in which the topic of the evolution of artificial intelligence was being discussed. And I gave a dinner. There was a conference for AI in New York. I invited 8 of their participants, plus 8 what I called civilians who knew nothing about AI, to see whether we could have an exchange. It was a total failure because I asked the AI people what they were at the edge of what discoveries they were. But they weren't very eager to say that in front of their colleagues, since they were aiming to follow Google. And the civilians only were thinking about government regulation and how to avoid it. And I wasn't particularly interested in regulating it. I was interested in understanding it. So over a period of nearly 3 years now, Eric and Dan and I, together with people that we invite periodically, have been discussing aspects of of the problem and its impact on the political world, on the evolution of strategy, and on the evolution of history as we could discover it. And in the course of these, I wrote an article about concerns that I have about the topic and why I think it is a fundamental topic if one wants to understand the likely evolution, and above all, if one wants to master it, and what responsibilities it brings with it to those who engage in it, and to bridge the gap between the extraordinary capacity of the scientific field to make advances in it and the lacking consciousness of the political and social science and humanistic world about the implications of what is changing, possibly our history.
Let me pick up there because I want to pick up with your Atlantic article. There's sort of a central thesis in it. Let me read it and get you to comment on it. You wrote that the technological advance that most altered the course of modern history was the invention of the printing press in the 15th century, which allowed the search for empirical knowledge to supplant liturgical doctrine and the age of reason to gradually supersede the age of religion. But this age of reason is now being challenged by an even more sweeping technological revolution, the birth of a world that relies on artificially intelligent machines powered by data and algorithms, but ungoverned by ethical or philosophical norms. I mean, what you're really asking there is, does the AI revolution presage a new Enlightenment or a new Dark Age?
We don't know. The capacities of artificial intelligence for suppressing free expressions and for guiding preferred thoughts are enormous. The necessity, however, of understanding these processes and bringing them into some relationship are equally, if not more enormous. Right now, we don't have a theory of how to relate the multiplication of choices that arises as a result of artificial intelligence to ethical criteria, or even to define what the ethical criteria are that apply to these fields. But at a moment when when most parts of the world are in upheaval, and when the direction of these upheavals it's a key issue, and of how to relate these various aspects to each other, it is imperative for artificial intelligence, if it plays any role in the process, as it will and must, to understand those questions.
So we're here at one of the world's great research education institutions. We know how much the Enlightenment changed education. How do you think AI has to change education? Both the mix, essentially the mix of education between humanities, philosophy, technology.
In the present world, the AI technical knowledge is far ahead of the political and social and other applications. I have a number of friends who are authors or historians, and when I meet with them, I tell them my concerns, and they don't really believe that AI is a fundamental shift in human consciousness. but I think it will be inevitable if one engages in intellectual exercises where the result of which is totally unexpected, which means that one has no criteria for their process, that the impact of AI will be of historic consequence. And we have to understand it first. How was it possible with the AlphaZero machine that by playing it, by permitting it to play with itself for 24 hours, to come up with a style of chess that has never been played before in the 1500 years of established chess? What was the thought process or the intellectual process that got there? And what are the implications? Because in every other respect, it was following the rules that had been established for the individual moves you could make. But the outcome was a game of chess that had not been seen before in human history. So we need to understand that process.
Dr. Kissinger, if you were Secretary of State Kissinger today, would you have an assistant secretary for AI? That is, you spend so much of your time negotiating arms control to limit and control the spread of nuclear weapons. Do we need a arms control, an AI basically control agreement with Russia, with China? Do you see that? Is there a parallel there?
Well, arms control was importantly an issue of numbers. The theory was, and it was basically correct, that if the two sides could limit the numbers and if they could share that information and if it was inspectable, and all of this was at that time possible, arms control negotiations might stabilize the situation. None of this applies to AI as it now exists, because the transparency that was essential for arms control would be very hard to establish, because it's my understanding that modern weapons now can be developed in a way that a transparent perception of it with the help of AI will be very difficult. The speed of cyber weapons would negate some of the control systems that had been established. In the period that I know, we used to think that as both sides learn more about each other's weapons, they can build restraint into their activities. But with AI, as it now stands, the other side's ignorance is one of your best weapons. So sharing information is going to be much more complicated. On the other hand, since it is also possible to multiply the types of weapons, the kind of information that needs to be shared must be carefully studied, but some criteria for it have to be established, or the world is inherently at the edge of an explosion, because with all the reduction in time and the increase in speed, preemption becomes an enormous temptation, complicated by the fact that you're not clear about what you want to preempt. All I'm trying to make clear is that when I was at Harvard, I spent a lot of time with MIT professors who were studying the problem of arms control. But almost all of the premises we developed then will be overturned by AI or will have to be modified. And I don't know any systematic work that is being done now. So when I listened to the previous discussion, there were so many fields just out of that particular question that would come to your mind.
You know, what comes through, Henry, from your remarks and from the Atlantic essay is, I think we're at a unique intersection that our species has never stood at before. That is, in 1945, we entered a world where one country post-Hiroshima could kill all of us. I think it's not impossible to project out in the future a world where one person can kill all of us, but at the same time where all of us could actually fix everything. That these same powers actually are creating a world, yes, where one of us could do great harm to all of us, but where all of us could actually feed, house, clothe, educate, improve the health care of every person on the planet if we put our minds to it. And I would say that means we've never been more godlike as a species than we are today. But if each individual is going to be that godlike, then being grounded in norms and values, philosophical constructs, at a minimum, the simple golden rule, is going to be essential. But we've actually never lived in a world where people embracing sustainable values that every single person has to do that.
Well, up to now, the idealistic notion of world peace assumed that at some point there would be a world order which every country and human being would follow, and which it's then implemented by some kind of universal consent. And it's an attractive theory. It has never been achieved because the cultural perceptions of some of the basic values that affect the issue of peace and the issue of cooperation have never been sufficiently harmonized, and because the world did not yet have a uniform political system. Now we have a world system that is sort of global, but it is composed of different cultural perceptions. So when the issue between us, say, and China, it's partly the technical ability to match each other, but it's also partly a different conception of how order is achieved. So one of the questions that will arise inevitably is it possible for 2 or 3 systems of artificial intelligence to coexist? And how does one do that? And how does one define it? Because I think that will be a more immediate issue than a global artificial system.
You know, one of the things my friend Larry Diamond, a democracy expert at Stanford, has written about, Henry, is that democracy recession we're going through. Democracy has been rolled back in a lot of places. And it's hard not to notice the connection with the rise of AI. I mean, you've got governments like in China and Egypt, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Russia, Hungary, are all perfecting these systems of control, using AI for control. Is AI going to be the death of democracy?
Well, AI makes it technically easier and even technically possible to supervise your population and to inform a central authority about the conduct of the population and to do it instantaneously. So then AI permits a type of political campaigning which destroys or limits the idea that separate ideas are in conflict with each other by working towards a consensus idea that is mechanically easier to distribute. So it becomes more difficult to develop elite kind of values, which to some extent have to exist in any to make any democracy work in order to have a standard of conduct that is certainly one of the challenges of our period. On the other hand, there are many arguments for why to permit a technical system to dominate every aspect of a country's and a society's life gradually leads to a deadening of values and therefore must be avoided. So how to reconcile the extraordinary technical ability to universalize good ideas, to keep them from being dominated by the dangerous ideas, and to know what are the essential ideas. These are all challenges, and from what I've seen of artificial intelligence, right now the technologists are way ahead of the humanists and philosophers. And we have to find a way of closing this gap before, with the best intentions of the world, technology creates capabilities that cannot no longer be brought into a context with which humanity, as we in the West conceive it, can coexist.
You know, some of the futurists who write about AI and present us with a world where manual labor will not be necessary. Machines and robots will do all that, and we'll all be able to elevate and explore our, greatest, human attributes. But one of the things that's always struck me about that is actually manual labor, working with things, whether you're working in a factory or even as a journalist, working with the just raw reporting. That's where I get my best ideas. I think working with a product is where you see, hey, we could fork off there, we could do this better here. Looking at it from a historical perspective, what do you think would be the implications of a world where manual labor, at the scale we've known it, since the Industrial Revolution, really is completely diminished?
Well, the shift in the type of labor from the countryside to the cities has already had a tremendous impact on revolutions. A problem that I have reflected upon without having a specific solution. If one looks at human history, the definition of the nature of reality has been one of the driving forces of philosophy, and after philosophy, science and other fields. That was the engine for the period of Enlightenment. Now we have a set of upheavals that occur the opposite way, that before you have the philosophic conception of the age of reason, leading then to science based on experimentation, you have science developing tremendous capabilities without as yet having a philosophical framework within which to put them. And when that develops into yet another step, as you have in Alpha Zero, where you discover something that you had not expected and that you had not planned for, you may have a shift in the perception of the nature of reality, and that would then be a transformation of history that has, I would say, I don't know a previous example. So working in this field is a tremendous responsibility and a tremendous challenge to the perception of evolution, and it will probably have to be navigated by seeing whether more than one system can coexist, because the tendency may be otherwise to aim for a universal domination, which with the destructiveness of what can be done would be too dangerous. But these are reflections of an amateur who has taken his experiences in politics and his study of history and applied it to this extraordinary new development. And these are questions that I'm asking. They're not answers that I'm proposing.
So to close, Henry, when you come back 10 years from now and give Raphael a report card for the School of Computing, what will constitute success, do you think, for this great new enterprise?
I would like to see whether the people who are exploring the next state, the next future, have got a better grip than now exists on the nature of the conceptions that artificial intelligence produces. I'm told that self-driving cars, for example, when they stop at a traffic light, edge forward with the other cars to see whether they beat the traffic. But where did they learn that? It's not in their system. So what are these machines learning that they don't tell us because they don't communicate? We have to study what they're doing to see what the process is. Then I would like to see whether it has been possible to develop some concepts that are comparable to the arms control concepts in which I was involved, say, 50 years ago, which were not always successful, but the theory was quite explicable. We don't have that yet. And so in all of the fields of exploration, or in most of the fields, I would be very interested to see whether the enterprises or the institutions that are fostering them are not just solving the problem that got them interested, but are studying the implications and have made some progress in the implications that will determine our future and the future of the world.
Raphael, you have your homework. Thank you very much.